If you're an athlete, I'm sure you've had to do double days where you have sprint, agility, conditioning training, and strength training. But what I want to do is make sure that you know exactly how to do it in the order that you set it up in to make sure you get the most out of it and not receive any of the negative drawbacks that happen if you mess it up. What's up, I'm Nick Ladd. I'm a certified strength and conditioning coach, owner of the Peak Performance Program, and I've worked with hundreds of athletes. So let's dive right into it. And at the end of this, I'm actually going to show you a full workout breakdown of me going through the training sessions of how I would perform a double day or two trainings or doing speed and strength in the same session. Let's get into some of the benefits that tend to happen with doing both at the same time or in the same session. Okay, so some of the benefits right off the bat, like you know this, it's pretty efficient with your time. So rather than having to do one session here, wait maybe 6, 7, 8 hours, do it again, that would be most optimal, but it's not very efficient with your time, especially if you have a job, you have other things going on, you have practice, so it tends to get a little crazy. Not every athlete can do it unless they're like college athlete on summer break and they have nothing else going on. But for most of us that are, my age, 30 plus, and we're in a, say, club sport that are trying to get better and improve the performance, that really ain't happening, and you're gonna need to be more efficient with your time. So it can be very efficient with time. You will also see an improved or enhanced athletic ability. And the reason for this is that most people simply don't go out and do speed or sprint or agility training the later in life. And once you start to implement some of that back, it starts to get really good. You start to feel more athletic. You start to feel more springy. You can move quicker. You're more explosive. Okay. And then the last thing is that there's a better translation from strength training into speed training, because you are getting multiple or more frequency of having speed training throughout your week in order to help your strength gains and maximal force production and power production, and actually using it on the field, so you get a better translation of sport or into your sport or into speed. Now, there are a couple of mistakes that a lot of people make. Unfortunately, I still deal with this. Even some of my members in the Peak Performance Program, they'll ask me questions about this, and I always have to reiterate, this is how you're going to want to do it if you have to double up on a day. So some of the mistakes that happen, this is the biggest one, is incorrect exercise order. The way in which you set up your training plan and with your strength and speed training, it needs to be done in the right order to make sure that you are getting the most out of each component of your strength training. If not, you're going to see some negative drawbacks, which I'll get to in a second after this. Another biggest mistake is the insufficient recovery. Look, I'll be the first to say, when I was in my early 20s, I didn't care about recovery. I was young. I could recover really, really quickly. I could do double days all the time. But as you get older, the recovery becomes one of the most important factors for actually seeing growth and progress in your performance, and whether it's strength, power, speed, or in your sport. Because a lot of times people will do double days, or they'll have so much in every single session, they don't get enough recovery, which they quickly get into some of the overreaching and overtraining status, which then you'll see those negative impacts on your performance that aren't planned. Sometimes we will have planned overreaching times where, hey, I know we're going to get into a grind, but in the future of the program, we have planned out where we can rest and deload and then get those positive benefits back and get kind of that jump up in performance. But if you're just going through it constantly and don't have that stuff planned in, this insufficient recovery is going to lead to an overall decrease in performance and potentially put you at a little bit increased risk for some nagging aches and pains and things like that. And that really comes down to what I talked about a little bit. The third mistake is mismanaging training volume. Everyone tends to think more and more is better when it's not always the case. What happens is that your central nervous system downregulates, your muscles get tired and fatigued, and with strength, power, speed, those big three, you really need to have a fresh central nervous system to produce the most amount of force, the most amount of power, and the most amount of speed. Because if you're not reaching a high enough stimulus, you're not really going to get better with it. Now we're going to get into some of the negative drawbacks that happen if you have an incorrect exercise order, and I'm going to explain to you the correct exercise order that you should go through. The wrong order would be doing your strength training before your speed training. But before we get into that, I want to say that there are a few times where doing some sort of strength into speed work can be beneficial, but it's in it with very specific methods that you're using, and the dosage and amount of volumes are very small. And that would be into something that's called contrast training. That's where you do a heavy loaded movement, it could be a squat, a RDL, or something of that nature, into an explosive or plyometric based movement, in this case, a sprint movement. We have seen good results doing, say, like a high box squat into a 10-yard get off or 15-yard get off, because the volume we're using with the movement of that like high box squat is a very low volume. It's a high recruitment of motor units and strength and force output, but the volume's so low that it doesn't have a negative impact yet on, say, a sprint performance compared to doing an entire workout onto a sprint. The reason why you might use something like contrast training is to achieve something called post-activation potentiation, which simply means that the previous exercise gave a huge stimulus to muscular force output, power output, central nervous system drive, and then you take that and then go into your plyometric or sprint-based movement and see a better performance on it. We typically like to do a sled drag or sled sprint into normal sprints, as you're already going to be out in the field anyway. You can see all the benefits. So that is the one time I really think that it can be beneficial, but for full training systems and full training programs and workouts, you're going to always want to stick to speed first. So some of the negative effects of training strength before speed are going to be neuromuscular fatigue. Okay, so that is the wiring from your brain down your spinal cord into your muscles, and with fatigue, the synapses are going to be slower. You're not going to be able to contract the muscles as fast, get as much force out of them, and that will have a negative performance on your sprinting, as you're not going to be able to gain as much ground, cycle the legs through as quickly. And the next one is metabolic fatigue. So especially if you're doing a little bit higher volume of training for strength, maybe in 6 to 8 reps, you're going to accumulate some metabolic fatigue. You're going to get some soreness in the muscle, which is the next one. And when muscles are sore, they're a little bit fatigued, right? You've broken them down, right? Those little microfibers start to have little tears. They're not going to be able to contract as hard and as quickly as they possibly could because they've been fatigued and damaged, which again, the goal is maximal speed development. You're going to want to avoid some of this muscular damage that you're going to be having. Some of the negative impacts on sprint performance alone, you're going to have some reduced explosiveness, right? That first step is not going to be as explosive again because your muscles have been damaged, right? You're going to have some decreased coordination. I think this is a huge one that people tend to not realize or think about in terms of doing some of this type of training with power and speed output. Coordination is, right, it's all about muscle firing sequence and linking the muscles together to produce the most amount of force possible in the most efficient manner as possible. If you start to have decreased coordination, right, you're not going to be able to fire those muscles in as good of a sequence as you possibly could. And to really understand how coordination plays into some power output, what I want you to do is take your dominant side that you're able to turn with. So if you're a baseball player, it's going to be the side that you typically hit on, or if you're like right-handed, typically it's going to be turning left. And I want you to take a med ball, and I want you to try to throw it as hard as you possibly can, doing, say, like a lateral toss into a wall where you feel very coordinated and very strong. Okay? Notice how fast the ball is, how loud it sounds, how much power you're going to generate. And then I want you to go to your non-dominant side and try to turn and throw the ball. That alone is going to show you the difference and show you how big of an impact coordination has in your overall power and speed outputs that you're trying to achieve. Now, this is going to be probably on a little bit smaller scale, but that's an example of going right to left where you're dominant versus non-dominant. But you can see how any of those small 1 to 2% are going to impact your speed overall. The other thing is you're going to have lower energy available, right? Like you just expended a lot of energy doing this. So you're not going to have as much glycogen in the system. You're not going to have as good of resynthesis rate. So you may only get out and be able to do 2, 3 sprints before you're tired and everything starts to diminish on the way down. Okay? And then you're also going to have a increased perceived level of exertion, so you're going to find that the sprints are harder, and you're probably going to be less motivated to actually do them. So now we're going to go into why speed training should actually come first, and then we'll get into the training after that. So why do speed training first? Well, it's just going to be the exact opposite of what you just learned, right? It's going to be because we have a fresh neuromuscular system, meaning that we can fire our muscles faster, we can produce more force, we're better coordinated and have improved technique. And if you know anything about sprinting and trying to improve your sprinting and speed, technique is a huge issue or piece of the puzzle that can improve your overall sprint speed, because if you improve your technique, you have better contact with the ground in the right places, and you're able to accelerate or hit your top speed faster, reducing risk for injury. So technique plays a huge piece, and if you're already fatigued or mentally drained, you're probably not going to have the best technique, and you're going to just stack onto your bad habits already, okay? And then optimal energy utilization, okay? So you're using the right energy systems for the intended task, which is primarily going to be your creatine phosphate and alactic systems that are your high power outputs with very fatiguing. So, and then the last piece is going to be, when you do speed first, it serves as a warm-up. Like, you do not really need to do a warm-up going into your strength training sessions if they're one right after the other, because you're fully ready to go. Okay, and it's going to serve as a CNS primer for strength, because this is just, sprinting is so high of a explosive movement and demand on the central nervous system that it's going to be primed and ready to go to produce a lot of force when you go into your strength training sessions, assuming volume is low with this type of training. So let's dive into the training. What does an actual double day look like doing speed and strength training? All right, so let's get into the two different blocks of training within this workout. So we have our speed on one side, and then we have our strength on the other side. So I've broken it down into more of an acceleration and agility focused day or a top speed. You can choose to combine them and do both, but I think it's a little bit better to choose to either focus on acceleration and have some agility in there, or purely focus on top speed. If you try to do too much at once, it's going to be a lot, and it's just going to add to the overall training volume. So let's get into more of the acceleration and agility days. So the warm-ups and primer CNS work is all going to be the same. You have your A skips, B skips, you have your walking lunges, things like that to get the body ready, get it to go. Then we'll get into like a little bit of like CNS prep, primers. These could be like some glute activation exercises, hip activation exercises. You can do a little bit of like broad jumps, things like that. For me, I felt really slow and lethargic, and I wanted to get the system moving quickly. So I went through and did a ladder drill just one time through a couple different movements, starting off with both feet on some hops, side-to-side hops, and then going into single leg variations. And then I really started to pick it up and get into more of the fast up and down, getting the central nervous system going. I think if you're going to do the agility ladder, just know its intended purpose. It's called an agility ladder, but I really see it as a form of plyometrics and movement prep before getting into some other stuff. So with the acceleration work, you're going to get into some technique work right off the bat, because that's when our coordination is highest, our energy is the highest. We can actually focus and get some of the work in. So if it's more of an acceleration focus day, I'll do 3, 5, and 7 cone starts, where I'm trying to focus on having a negative foot contact on the way back. And then I'll slowly progress that into our more like power and acceleration focus, which is going to be our sled sprints into our normal sprints. Okay, this is that like contrast training set that I was talking about. After that, we'll get into some agility-based drills. We're just doing an aero drill with a couple different variations on it. Where it's a shuffle to a sprint or a sprint to a 45-degree back. Really great drill. If you want to make it even better, have a coach that's pointing you and telling you which ways to go. It'd be awesome for that. For top speed, same CNS, same kind of warm-up. Definitely spend a little bit more time warming up for a top speed day. Then we're going to get into some technique work. What I chose to do for technique on this day was do some wickets that were more stride control. So they're a little bit shorter, focusing on having like a quick back cycle and contacting the ground quickly. And then I didn't change the distance. All I tried to do was slowly increase the speed at which I ran through those wickets. So now my legs are having to turn over faster, 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 and faster. After that, then I went and lengthened them out to normal full wicket lengths, and I did some sprints through them, trying to maintain my technique with that before finally finishing with a couple of fly 30s, max effort, maximal rest, and you're done. Okay, with the speed training, again, you don't want it to be a ton of volume. You want to get in, get the stimulus, and then get over to your strength training, because you don't want to be too fatigued going into your strength training. With the strength training, kept it very simple. Tried to do some things like contrast sets and some supersets to minimize the amount of time we're going to be in there, but still get some effective training. So you can choose to break this up however you want, but typically if you're going to be doing a full body split, you want some sort of squat or a single leg squat. You want a hinge pattern in there. You want a press and a pull, whether it's either vertical or horizontal, that you're going to be doing, in some sort of core movement, whether it's a carry or something like that. So we did a contrast squat, so still going super high intensity and then taking it into, so this was a box squat into a seated box jump. And the reason we did that and we had a slow eccentric on the squat was because I was really focusing on not having any of the elastic components helping me or using the stretch, shorten cycle at all to produce the force and produce the power. And then we took a similar jump, like the rocker box jump, where you're not necessarily getting that down and up, where you're taking advantage of the amortization phase and the stretch shorten cycle to help produce power. So this was for me purely focused on like muscular driven power output to help correlate over to more of my acceleration with that. Then we went into just a press and a pull. We had some bench into some rows. Pretty simple. For most of these, I kept it all around, these first two, I kept it around 3 to 5 sets and around 3 reps of 5 here. And then these were, I believe, around 5 to 8 reps for these. After that, since in my training, I did a lot of top speed, which is very, there's a lot of hamstring and glute involved in that. I didn't want to do and hammer another heavy strength training movement, and I wanted to get more of a knee dominant hamstring. So that's why I did the GHD hamstring curls. And then finally, I just finished it out with a little bit of core training with some plank saws. They're way harder than they look, I promise you. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Hope you got some value out of it. That absolutely smoked me, so get yourself mentally ready if you're gonna do this. If you wanna check out some more resources I have around power and explosive training, check down below. You can book a strategy call with me if you wanna talk about training, wanna go through potentially what we have inside of the Peak Performance program. But other than that, like, follow, subscribe, comment any questions you have down below.